actually consider myself an entrepreneur first and an attorney second. I think that I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit since I was a kid. I actually have a funny story.
Welcome back to For Entrepreneurs by Entrepreneurs. I'm Eric Verdi. With us this week is Erica DiAngelo with DiAngelo Law. Now I know, you hear law, you hear attorneys, you think boring. I promise you, Erica is not boring. She is going to drop some nuggets on trademarks for us. Since our audience is mostly small business owners and entrepreneurs, how do we protect our IP, our intellectual property? How do we protect our branding? How do we protect our name? How do we protect, what we're trying to build as entrepreneurs? Most of us think, hey, okay, I don't need protection, and you might have, as an entrepreneur like me, like Erica, you might have 99 ideas that stink, but that one idea that is a breakthrough for you, if it's not protected, it will be knocked off. I promise you that. In some form or fashion, it will be knocked off. So Erica, that's a long-winded intro. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm excited to learn about trademarks because it is something that everybody should have. But before we get into the nuts and bolts, give us your backstory, a little bit about you.
Sure. So I established DiAngelo Law 5 years ago. We just had our 5-year anniversary. And originally we started off as a litigation firm and have evolved slowly into a business and trademark law firm, working with small businesses and entrepreneurs around the country. So we're based out of Florida, but it's awesome. We have a completely virtual practice, which has been super convenient since this pandemic started. I'm a Florida girl through and through, born and raised here. And I am glad that I'm here in the warm weather while I've been stuck in the pandemic, not being able to travel.
So you got your law degree from St. Thomas in Miami, correct?
That's right.
So personal, married, kids, family, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Sarasota. I'm not married, no kids. My boyfriend and I, we've been together for 4 years. So we're buying a house and we're moving to the beach. We live in Tampa right now, but we're moving over to Reddington Shores, which is about 45 minutes away from here, just north of St. Pete Beach. So I'm really excited for that. Gonna have a change of pace. I've been in downtown Tampa for about 4 or 5 years, so it'll be nice to live the more relaxed beach life.
Awesome. So my geography is horrible. Is that Gulf side or Atlantic Ocean side?
Gulf side.
Beautiful. All right. So you are an entrepreneur. So when you practice law, you said you have clients, entrepreneurs all over the country. Do you have to get licensed in every state?
So when it comes to trademarks, the answer is no.
Okay.
When it comes to other legal matters, like certain contracts that are state specific and certain laws that are state specific, I would have to be barred in each state, but I'm able to offer trademark services throughout the whole country.
So how did you decide you want to go to trademarks?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll give you the short version. I didn't know that I wanted to do trademarks when I was in law school or when I got out of law school. I never even crossed my mind that trademarks was a practice area. And after, bad experience at my first law firm where I was just doing family law and civil litigation, I left the firm. I didn't have a plan, but I figured at that point, I was like, I will go wait tables if I have to. I'm not going in another day. But when I left shortly thereafter, my biggest client at the firm had reached out to me and wanted me to continue representing his business. And I was like, I haven't been to trial. Are you sure you want me to do that? And he was sure. So I set up my business the following week, and I set it up with the intentions of him being my main client, his business being my main client. And after a few years of litigating, driving around the state, going, from courtroom to courtroom, and it was honestly miserable. I knew that I had to do something next, and that wasn't going to last forever anyway. But I didn't know exactly what. So I started visiting entrepreneurial organizations. And here in Tampa, we have a huge influx of small businesses and tech talent. So there's a lot of resources around here for small businesses. But as I was there, I was like, wow, I really like this. I really like this entrepreneurial community. And I was also sort of acting as an in-house attorney for the client that I was representing as well. So I was learning a lot about what I could have done to prevent this litigation. So I started moving in the direction of preventative business law. And as I started learning more and more about that, I realized that trademarks was a big missing piece. Like the first thing that people do when they name their business, when they start a business, is name their business, but they don't think about anything that goes into it, including myself. You know, when I opened my law firm and named it DiAngelo Law, I didn't think about it. I was like, I need to get this open. How do I get a corporation or some sort of entity set up as fast as possible so I can open that bank account and I can start filing cases, right? So I'm there, I'm guilty, but I did see that that was a huge missing piece. And so over time, I've shifted the focus of my law firm from litigation to transactional business law, and now predominantly towards trademarks.
I love it. So most people think, professionals in your realm, attorneys, doctors, lawyers, dentists, accountants, that they just have business, right? It's just a successful business. In reality, each doctor, accountant, lawyer is an entrepreneur, right? Because you're running, unless you go work for like a big, huge firm where you're an employee, right? And that there's pluses and minuses to both. But specifically, you have to go get clients. So when did you think like you had that entrepreneurial mindset? Because it is a large step. Like that's, most physicians are horrible money managers. They make a boatload of money, but they spend a shitload of money. So when did you realize that you were an entrepreneur?
I actually consider myself an entrepreneur first and an attorney second. I think that I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit since I was a kid. I actually have a funny story. When I was 17, I started a company, and it was called Razzle Dazzle Inc. And I sold handbags at the flea markets with, bedazzled glitter and ribbons and all kinds of stuff on it, right? And the first day that I went to the flea market to sell my bags, I got a cease and desist notice for a trademark violation. There was another booth over there with these women selling clothes under the Razzle Dazzle name. But that's just an example to illustrate that I feel like I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I always wanted to eventually have my own law practice, even though I did not go in the path that I intended to at all. But I think it's just something that's always kind of been inside me.
Awesome. So we talked about this in the pre-interview. What's your entrepreneurial superpower? Because I believe every successful entrepreneur has something, or maybe two things, but really something that they do really, really well. What's your entrepreneurial superpower?
It's my knowledge about trademarks and my ability to educate on it.
Okay. So being an entrepreneur yourself, can you, everybody knows what a trademark is. Can you share with us, like the steps? And I think you might have a presentation that you've done before. Can you share with us like what the steps are to getting something trademarked, the importance of it? Can you do a deep dive for us? Do you mind, Erica?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that everybody doesn't know what a trademark is. Honestly, I think some of us take it for granted if we've been in business for a while. But just to give some context and overview quickly, a trademark is what represents your brand. It indicates the source of your service or goods to consumers. So it could be the name of your brand. It could be the name of your podcast. It could be the name of a course that's a sub brand, a slogan or a logo even. So it's all of those things that tell consumers this is derived from your business.
Okay.
So my presentation keeps giving me an error message now. Let's see if we'll present. Okay.
No worries. Well, let's.
It's working. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So let's talk about, what trademarks protect. There we go. There we are. It just came up. So what trademarks protect, how you get a trademark in place. Like I wouldn't even know where to file it.
Yes. So I'm talking about federal trademarks in the United States for purposes of our conversation. There are, trademarks in every country. There's trademarks in every state. But generally speaking, federal is the one that's going to give most business the protection they need in the United States.
Okay.
So you would go to what's called uspto.gov. That is the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and that's where you can file for your trademark. But before you get to that step, there's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration to even be able to know if you're going to be able to get that trademark before you spend the time and money trying to apply for one. It's not like when you go to the Secretary of State to get an LLC, you can't just like apply and they say, okay, here's your, certificate in 2 weeks. It's a very lengthy process. It typically takes close to a year to get your trademark registration.
Okay. Rock and roll, girlfriend.
All right. So the first thing you want to do is pick a name. And like I mentioned briefly before, I know that we all want to just like pick a name that we love and stick to it, but there's actually a process for picking a name. And of course you want to do your marketing stuff first. That's not my expertise here, so I'm not going to go in depth, but I'll tell you from the legal perspective what you need to be thinking about. There's 3 things that you want your name to encompass or your trademark to encompass. It needs to be distinctive, protectable, and not infringing on anybody else. And there's 2 things that we have to determine those 3 factors. One is called the trademark spectrum, and the next is the trademark search. And we'll go into a little bit more depth on each of those things so you guys can get an understanding. But I want to repeat that again. You want it to be distinctive, protectable, and not infringing on others. So first, the trademark spectrum. This is really it's a spectrum from weakest to strongest of the strength of your trademark. And this goes to the protectability and distinctiveness of your trademark. Because if it's generic, it's not protectable. It's also not distinctive, right? So from the bottom of the top, it goes generic, descriptive, suggestive, arbitrary, and fanciful.
Completely made up words. That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, that's fanciful. So fanciful is like Yahoo.
Like Google, yeah.
Well, that's debatable, actually. I thought Google was a fanciful word, but then I heard it actually has a meaning. So it might just be arbitrary, but that's up for debate.
Okay.
But yeah, that's still a good example. So something that's completely made up is fanciful. And the advantage to that is that it's going to be really, really strong. But the downside is that it's going to take you a bigger marketing budget for people to understand what your brand is, unless you have some descriptive words that get added on. Like we'll just go with Yahoo again, but if Yahoo was the name of your consulting company and you called it Yahoo Consulting Company, then you have a combination, right? You have a fanciful combined with a descriptive term. So now people have a better understanding of what your business is. But what happens, and people can obviously understand what fanciful is and pretty easy to understand what generic is, but in the middle is kind of a gray area. And especially between descriptive and suggestive, it's really hard sometimes to distinguish which is which, but it's really important because descriptive marks cannot get full trademark protection, at least not at first. So an example of descriptive trademark that you've probably heard of is Best Buy. So Best Buy is an inherently descriptive trademark, but because they've gotten so popular, they've actually acquired distinctiveness. Their distinctiveness wasn't inherent, it was acquired. So then they are able to get the full scope of trademark protection after they could prove that they've acquired distinctiveness. But when you're just starting out on a brand and you have a descriptive trademark, you're not going to be able to get that full level of protection. And we'll talk about in a little bit why it's so important to get that protection. But the sweet spot that a lot of people want to be in is suggestive. And that's because it's suggestive is enough to give people information about what your trademark is being used for in connection with, what kind of services or products that you're providing. But it also helps you from the marketing standpoint. So you don't have to spend as much money on this arbitrary or fanciful trademark to try to convey what that is. And you still have enough legal protection because it is inherently distinctive if you get into that suggestive category. So it can be really difficult to distinguish between what is descriptive and what is suggestive. So I'll give you guys a couple examples. This is one of the best ways to illustrate that. So we already talked about an example of descriptive. That would be Best Buy or Designer Shoe Warehouse, DSW. Suggestive would be Dairy Queen for ice cream, right? So we have the context of dairy for ice cream, but it really doesn't describe what you're providing, it doesn't describe ice cream, it just kind of hints at it. It requires some imagination and a mental leap. Snowball, my microphone here, really, it's a spherical microphone, right? So snowball is suggestive of that, but it's certainly not descriptive of a microphone. And another one is chicken of the sea for tuna. Okay, like if you think about it, okay, I see how tuna could be chicken of the sea, but it's not immediately obvious. It's not descriptive. So that's a really good category to be in. You can also kind of get into that middle category by combining descriptive terminology with an arbitrary or fanciful word, right? That kind of puts you in the middle as well. So yeah, I mean, suggestive and above is where you want to be. I highly recommend making sure that you choose a good name for your business using this trademark spectrum, and that's going to help you determine if it's distinctive and protectable. But after that, you have some more work to do. And I'll give you guys some hints here. So if you're brainstorming your names, you're using the trademark spectrum, you're narrowing things down, you can do what's called a test search. So if you do the test search, that's a really good starting point. It's going to show exact matches, so it'll help you knock some names off of your list, but that is not all encompassing. And I'll go into a little bit more about what the standard of confusion is. But I also want to iterate that it's not what happens on your Secretary of State website. It's not Google, and it's not, is this domain name available? Although I highly recommend getting your domain name before you file for a trademark or for your LLC, because there are cyber squatters who just watch those public records and they scoop things up. If they think that's a good name, they'll scoop it up and try to sell it back to you for a couple $1,000s. But that said, you need to get a real search done, and it needs to be by an attorney who specializes in trademarks, because attorneys who don't specialize in trademarks don't have this software. So the software that you need is similar to what the trademark office uses themselves. It's going to search your proposed trademark for sound, sight, and meaning equivalence. Okay, so to give you a couple examples of what that means, I like to use the foreign equivalent. If you have a skincare company called, well, there's already one called La Mer, and if you want to name yours The Sea, you're going to get refused because that is the foreign equivalent. It is the same trademark, just in a different language, and that's not acceptable. So it's also something like if you are, Tomahawk Painting Company versus Tomahawk Finishings, those are identical, okay? Painting and finishings are identical for purposes of the trademark office. And if you type in Tomahawk Painting into test, well, Tomahawk Finishings isn't going to show up, right? So there's just a very advanced algorithm. We do these searches, we get hundreds, if not thousands of results. And what's really important is to know how to read it, to know what trademarks are going to be a potential problem and what trademarks are not really going to interfere with it. So that's how you determine whether you're not infringing on somebody. And the second way to decide whether your trademark is actually protectable. Because if somebody already has a trademark out there similar to yours, you're not going to be able to get it registered. So super important. You start with the trademark spectrum to choose your name, narrow it down with the test search, and then get an actual comprehensive trademark search before you go through the trademark process. As I mentioned, go ahead.
So when I was starting my company and I went to GoDaddy and I started typing in different variations of different names that I was narrowing it down to, that's not the correct way to do a search.
Actually, it's a really important component, but it's definitely not the right way to do a search.
Okay.
You want to make sure that your domain name is available before you start investing into a brand, but you also need to do these other things.
So explain to me when you see the R at the end of a name versus a TM, like what's the difference between those two?
So an R means that it's actually registered. It's an officially registered trademark. A TM or an SM just means that somebody's claiming ownership of it. So you innately have trademark rights to your trademark when you start using them. But if you don't have registration, you don't have a lot of protection over it.
Legal protection.
Right. You have some theoretical legal protection if you don't have it. But putting a TM on there is a great way to put people on notice and deter people from trying to use your trademark. But ultimately, if you have the R and you're not using it incorrectly, you're actually registered, then you have all the protection that you need. You can actually make sure other people stop using that trademark.
Got it.
So one of the things I was going to say about why it's so important to do all this before you invest into a name is because of the time that it takes to get a trademark and the financial investment. So it takes about a year to get a trademark registered. The absolute best case possible scenario is 6 months. And I mean, the stars have to align for that to happen. Okay, like frankly, it's a government organization. There's a huge waiting game. You don't even hear back for at least 3 months after you file. So definitely want to make sure that as you're thinking about things, you have realistic expectations. A trademark process is going to take close to a year. It could take longer. It could take slightly shorter, but it's a good ballpark. And then there's also the financial investment that goes into it too, whether you decide to use an attorney or not, which I think you should, because there's a lot of pitfalls that people don't anticipate. But regardless, there's still filing fees, So, and if you mess it up, then you're set back so many months. But I'll go into a few reasons why trademarks are so important, right? Because some people are like, oh, I'm just starting out. I'm a small business. I don't need to be thinking about these things. But that is false. In fact, small businesses are some of the most at-risk businesses because they don't have the pockets that the bigger businesses have. So you're using a brand that a big company wants, they can go get that trademark registered and then send you a cease and desist. And what are you going to do about it? Your two choices are fight them and spend minimum 20 grand minimum to fight them if you have grounds, or change your name. And I mean, like, even if you've invested a year into your name, that's your goodwill. That is your reputation. That is what we all work as business owners to grow, right? Is the goodwill associated with the name of our business.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, you've got to have protection, like we talked about earlier, in that one or two with your company, that one or two ideas that you might have that are actually breakthrough ideas. You've got to have protection because you don't want other, especially bigger businesses, knocking them off.
Yeah, and with a lot of things, you have people who have these concepts or methodologies or certain things, and they're not protectable by another legal methodology. So the most important thing that comes down to it is the brand recognition associated with it. Somebody can knock it off, but they're not you. They're not your brand. So you got to make sure that they can distinguish, oh, these are the real deal. These are the legit guys. They did it first. They did it best, right? Because you can't always protect these concepts.
Right.
Like you can protect inventions with patents, but you can't just protect concepts. So that's why investing into the brand connected with it is so important. But it's also important for a number of other reasons, especially in this growing digital world that we live in. Amazon brand registry actually requires you to have a federal trademark, and it has to be the good kind. It can't be the kind that you get with a descriptive trademark. So like literally it's a requirement that you have a strong name that with a registered trademark for you to get on Amazon brand registry and sell, products on there. And that's a trend too. Like that's not, I mean, Amazon's the biggest one doing it for now, but we have to have measures to combat all these infringements in the world. So that's definitely a trend. I mentioned the digital world we live in, and there's a lot of things that also go into that, right? Like social media, like advertising, your domain name, and having your trademark registered gives you protection over those things as well. So if somebody gets on Instagram and they're using your brand name and they're selling the same services or products, you can go to Instagram and say, hey, here's my trademark registration. Give me my domain name back. And they will. They really
Awesome.
will. Yeah.
So at what point of a business or an idea or an organization or company is it needed and meaningful to go for a trademark, to apply for a trademark?
So the best way to do it, and look, I understand that businesses have budgets, right? Especially when they're starting out and they're cost conscious. However, you're investing into them from the beginning. The best time to protect your business's name is in the beginning. Maybe you don't need to get your logo protected right away because you're still trying to feel out your branding, still trying to figure that out. Logos change, but your name is going to be the same, presumably forever, right? So the sooner the better. You can actually do it before you even start your business. Like I started a podcast this year, but I knew the name of the podcast last year. I wanted this name. I went through all the same steps that I just talked to you guys about today. And I applied for the trademark long before I was ever using it. And so I got my approval for it just a few months before I launched it. And I still don't have the official registration. I have the approval, but I'm still on a waiting period. So I made sure that I was going to be able to protect that name before I even launched it. And that's the best way to do it. If you didn't do that, I mean, I get it, but just do it now. You know, think about it. Put some time aside. You won't have to do the trademark spectrum part because you already picked a name if you've been in business for a while. But you know what? Sometimes I have people who come to me 20 years in business and they tell me, oh, well, now we want to get on Amazon, or, oh, so-and-so just sent me a cease and desist letter. They have this name. Guess what? You are going to either fork over 20 grand minimum or you're going to change your name. So if I have a client and they've been in business for 20 years and I tell them, hey, there's another trademark out there, you can't get it protected, like they need to take it seriously, that they should probably consider at this moment in time either changing their name or start planning for a lawsuit, like start saving for a lawsuit. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is you never know when that day comes.
All right, so I'm going to go off topic here.
Okay.
So I'm a huge sports fan, and living in Frederick, outside of DC and Baltimore, I grew up a Washington Redskin fan. Okay. The Redskins have recently changed their name to the Washington football team. And when everything, they stopped using the Redskins as their name, and there was Warriors, there was Red Tails, there was, about 15 or 20 names in the hat that they were considered. There's is it a trademark squatter? Is that what they do?
This guy did, but it's pointless.
So you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about then.
I know what you're talking about.
So he just did those in hopes that the Washington football team, Dan Snyder, the owner, would go to him and say, I'll give you $1 million for this name.
Well, he kind of committed fraud.
He did.
But yeah, so basically when you file for a trademark, you have to have a bona fide intent to use that in connection with the product.
So how the hell did he get a trademark then if he didn't have a bona fide intent? Whose fault was that?
He committed fraud. So most of them were just applied for. He didn't actually get the registrations. But there was one, I don't remember which one, where what he did is he got a shirt, or he got some sort of apparel printed with Washington, whatever the trademark was. And he did what you need to do for proof, which is fraud. He's not actively out there selling, these trademark products. Like, he just did that to find a workaround and get the name, and presumably in attempt to get paid. I mean, I've read some of the articles and some of his statements, and he says that's not what it was. But really, trademark squatting isn't a serious thing like it is with domains, because you ultimately have to prove it. The downside is you kind of get 3 years. Like, if you apply as intent to use as trademark, you can extend that for up to 3 years. But each time you're swearing under oath that you have a bona fide intent to use it. So, I mean, that's still fraud.
And so what I heard was the Washington football team had Washington Warriors. They did have it trademarked, but then it expired like in the last 2 or 3 years. So funny, just a little side note here. So, okay, so that's a good point. So you have to have specific intent. You've got to, how long's the paperwork like to fill out? Like, what do you have to show with your intent?
So, well, it depends on which type of trademark. So if you haven't started yet, let's just use apparel for purpose of this example. You're going to start a company and you're going to sell apparel. In that instance, you just have to swear. You just like basically click a button and you say, I swear under oath I have a bona fide intent to use this trademark in connection with apparel, specifically pants, shirts, whatever, right? You have to be specific. And that's it. And you go through all these steps. You go through a publication stage where people can oppose your trademark, and then they give you approval, which is called a notice of allowance. And you have a 6-month window to actually prove that you are now using this trademark in commerce in connection with apparel, right? Apparel, okay. Whatever you applied for. If at the end of that 6 months, you're not ready yet, you're like, man, this pandemic hit, like I can't get my stuff from China. I'm not going to be able to start selling these t-shirts. You can get an extension. There's a fee though. It's like $100 or $125. And you get an extension, and you can do that for up to 3 years. So in that sense, that can be a burden to people, especially if they apply for a trademark application that's overbroad. Like let's say it's a gym, and this gym applies for personal training services, a physical, brick and mortar gym, apparel, supplements, all these things. And all they are really doing is opening a gym. Now, anybody who has a similar name, but they're not a gym, they're just a supplement company. Now, the supplement company is kind of blocked from getting that trademark that has a similar name, even though that gym actually has no intention of selling supplements in connection with their trademark. But because they have intent to use, quote unquote, in their application, now nobody else can get that. So it's a good thing for people who do it first, because you like preserve your time in line, but it kind of sucks for people who are just trying to do something different.
Got it. What you said there made me realize how important it is to have somebody like you that understands the ins and outs of the law and understands exactly, the process to get a trademark accepted. So with that, how would listeners, viewers get a hold of you, find you, learn more about you if they wanted, obviously trademarks are important, especially if you have a business. How would people get a hold of you, Erica?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. You can go to my website, DiAngeloLaw.com, and that's spelled DiAngelo Law.com. I'm at DiAngelo Law on all the social medias. And you can email me to Erica at DiAngeloLaw.com, and Erica is spelled ERICA. So if you reach out, we'll get you set up so we can, discuss more in depth your specific situation and let you know what we can or cannot do.
And tell us a little bit about your podcast, Make a Seat.
Yeah, so my podcast is a combination of guest interviews with successful entrepreneurs talking about their journey and their hardships, and it's combined with legal nuggets. So I like to use real world examples of legal issues that businesses and entrepreneurs actually face. So the concept of make a seat is if they're not going to give you a seat at the table, make a seat for yourself. So that's kind of the premise behind it, the self-empowerment. It's on all the podcast outlets, so you can definitely go find it and subscribe and let me know what you think.
Awesome. Erica, I love it. I love that you're an entrepreneur, but you're also helping entrepreneurs. Kudos to you.
Yay, thank you.
Listeners, viewers, episode 31 of For Entrepreneurs by Entrepreneurs. Erica DiAngelo Law, trademark specialist. If you are a small business owner and you want protection, reach out to Erica. That's it for this episode, and we are out.